Starting off with the chapter Chemical Energetics. So, what are energetics of a reaction? We have two types of reaction. One of them is known as exothermic, and the other one is known as endothermic. Exothermic is a reaction in which energy is released, and endothermic is a reaction in which energy is gained and absorbed. ठीक है? Now, over here in exothermic reaction, the reactants always have a higher energy than the products. And in endothermic reaction, the products have a higher energy than the reactant. अब यहाँ पे products की ज़्यादा energy और reactants की जो energy है वो कम है. यहाँ भी reactants की ज़्यादा energy but products की energy कम है. इसका जो delta H होगा, delta H क्या होता है? Delta H is the enthalpy. Delta H is the enthalpy change. Exothermic would always have a negative enthalpy and endothermic reaction would always have a positive enthalpy. क्योंकि यहाँ पे energy is being absorbed और वहाँ पे energy is being lost or released. So exothermic reaction क्या है? A reaction in which energy is given out to the surroundings and the temperature of the environment increases. मतलब if this is my system, यहाँ पे reactants react कर रहे हैं to form products, energy is given out. अब when energy is given out, जो बाहर का टेम्परेचर वो राइज कर जाएगा बिकॉज हीट इज कमिंग आउट ऑफ द सिस्टम और अंदर का टेम्परेचर डिक्रीज कर जाएगा. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, combustion of fuels, reactions of acids and metals, and neutralization reactions. Whereas in an endothermic reaction, a reaction in which energy is taken in from the surroundings, for example, वहाँ पे environment decrease हो जाता है. मतलब कि if this is the system, now in endothermic reaction, heat energy is being taken in. When heat energy is being taken in, this means what? This means that the temperature of the surroundings is decreasing and the energy change will be positive. For example, thermal decomposition of carbonates, electrolysis, and some stages of photosynthesis as well. Whether a reaction is endothermic or exothermic depends on the difference between the energy needed to break the bonds. Ab kyunki what happens in a reaction? You are converting reactants into products. Now you have to break the reactants. Every reaction requires what? Breaking of the reactants so that products can be made. Making of the products. Every reaction, whatever reaction it is, there is breaking of reactions and making of product. So remember रखें that, remember, reactants में bond breaking takes place and in the products bond making takes place. Bond making is always exothermic and bond breaking is always endothermic. Got it? So
Yeah.
endothermic को देखें, if more energy is absorbed than it is released, the reaction would be endothermic. More energy is required to break the bonds than it is gained from making new bonds. क्योंकि making new bonds is exothermic, breaking the bonds is endothermic. So when more energy would be required to break the bonds than gained from making the new bonds, तो आपके पास ये रिएक्शन क्या होगा? एंडोथर्मिक. और इसका ऑपोजिट क्या होगा? When more energy is required to make the bonds than released from making the new from breaking the bonds, वो reaction कौन सा होगा? Exothermic. Now the change in energy is positive since the products have more energy than the reactants. The symbol delta H is used to show the change in heat energy, या हम इसको enthalpy भी कहते हैं, which is basically the measure of the total heat of a reaction of a chemical reaction. Therefore, an endothermic reaction has a positive delta H value. So here you can see reactants are being broken down into simpler reactants so they can actually react as well. Exothermic क्या है? If more energy is released than is absorbed, then the reaction is exothermic. More energy is released when new bonds are formed than energy required to break the bonds in the reactants. तो फिर क्या होगा? अब ये याद रखिए, this is a very important line. ठीक है, यहाँ पे भी this was a very important line that whenever a question is asked you that XYZ whatever reaction is given to you in the paper और वहाँ पे question आता है why is this specific reaction endothermic, you're going to write these lines. And if the question comes why is any XYZ ABC reaction exothermic, you're going to write these lines. So the change in energy in exothermic would be negative since the products have less energy than the reactants. Exothermic reaction would have a negative enthalpy change values. Here you can see that the reactants which were broken down are now bond making हो रही है इनकी and they are converting into products. So both exothermic and endothermic reactions have specific energy level diagrams as well. These are the graphical representations of the heat changes in the chemical reactions, and the enthalpy of the reactants and products is displayed on the y-axis. Reaction pathway is shown on the x-axis, and the arrow on the diagrams indicate whether the reaction is exothermic or endothermic. अब exothermic को देखिए arrow कहाँ आ रहा है नीचे आ रहा है which means एक्सोथर्मिक रिएक्शन है यहाँ पे जो एरो है ये ऊपर जा रहा है इट इज एन एंडोथर्मिक रिएक्टेंट एक्सोथर्मिक में रिएक्टेंट्स हैव अ हायर एनर्जी प्रोडक्ट्स हैव अ लोअर एनर्जी एंडोथर्मिक में क्या है प्रोडक्ट्स हैव अ हायर एनर्जी रिएक्टेंट्स हैव अ लोअर एनर्जी so during an exothermic reaction, energy is given out. This means that the energy of the products will be lower than the energy of the reactant, so the change in enthalpy is negative. And that is also represented on the energy level diagram that we saw on the previous slide, along with a downward arrow as the energy of the products is lower than the reactants. But during an endothermic reaction, energy is absorbed. This means that the energy of the product will be higher than the energy of the reactant, so enthalpy change जो है वो positive है. And that is also represented on the energy level diagram above कि products की अब energy यहाँ पे higher होगी. So how do we calculate an energy of a reaction? Each chemical bond has a specific bond energy associated with it. ठीक है, for example, chlorine has which bond? Chlorine bond है. For example, अब एक molecule है H2O. अब H2O के अंदर what do you have? H2O के अंदर you have two OH bonds. You have two which bonds? Two OH bonds है. For example, एक molecule है CH4. ठीक है, अब CH4 के अंदर 4 C और H के bonds हैं. कोई molecule है NH3 है. NH3 means what? इस तरह करके एक नाइट्रोजन और 3 हाइड्रोजन है. NH3 has 3 NH bonds. 3 NH bonds हैं. So every bond has its own energy that is required to break that specific bond or the amount of energy given out when the bond is formed. This can be used to calculate how much heat would be released or absorbed in a reaction. And to know this, we need to know the bonds that are present in both the reactants and the product. तो सबसे पहले हम क्या करेंगे? We are going to add together all the bond energies that is taken in. मतलब कि पहले आप सारे reactants की bond energy निकाल लो और then calculate all the bond energies, take a sum of all the bond energies in the products. और उसके बाद आप एक formula apply करो reactants minus products, या फिर इसको ऐसे भी कह सकते हैं first find all the sum of energies required to break the bonds, then to make the bonds मतलब कि products, and then do breaking minus making. So it's the same thing क्योंकि रिएक्टेंट्स का मतलब ये है कि ब्रेकिंग हो रही है एंड प्रोडक्ट्स मींस दैट मेकिंग हो रही है. फॉर एग्जांपल वी हैव एन एक्सोथर्मिक रिएक्शन. हाइड्रोजन एंड क्लोरीन रिएक्ट टू फॉर्म हाइड्रोजन क्लोराइड गैस एंड दिस इज द रिएक्शन. अब H2 का क्या मतलब है? दिस बॉन्ड प्लस Cl2 का बॉन्ड का क्या मतलब है? Cl बॉन्ड. ठीक है, फॉर्म्स व्हाट? 2 times HCl बॉन्ड. ठीक है, so we need the bond energy of this HCl bond, the bond energy of ClCl bond, the bond energy of HH bond. अब देखते हैं. So we are given the bond energy of HH bond which is 436. 436 plus ClCl की क्या है? 243. ठीक है, it is 243. तो इसका सम कर देंगे तो आपके पास आंसर आ जाएगा 679. ठीक है, अब प्रोडक्ट्स की क्या है? 2 times HCl's bond energy. HCl की bond energy क्या है? 432. Because of this moles, we have to multiply 2 times into 432. क्या बन जाएगा? 864. अब आपने क्या करना है? रिएक्टेंट्स या ब्रेकिंग माइनस द प्रोडक्ट्स मतलब मेकिंग. 679 माइनस 864 करेंगे तो you are going to have your answer which is minus 185 kilojoule per mole. And this negative sign confirms that this reaction is an exothermic reaction. अगर positive होता then the sign would be endothermic reaction. Then we have another example as well. We have two HBr bonds breaking into HH and BrBr. यहाँ पे पहले आप reactants की निकालो energy, then आप products का sum लो, then इन दोनों को minus करो and you will have your answer. So here are the bond energies given to you as well, and you can easily see the solution over here as well. पहले उन्होंने energy in निकाली है. Energy in means in the reactants which are required for breaking. Then they calculated the sum of energy out, मतलब कि in the products जहाँ पे मेकिंग हो रही थी. Then they subtracted 732 minus 629. Answer है plus 103. This plus sign indicates that the reaction was an endothermic reaction. Now we'll talk about energy transfer. Energy transfers के बहुत से तरीके हैं through fuel, combustion, hydrogen. If we talk about the energy from fuels, a fuel is a substance which releases energy when burned. And when the fuel is a hydrocarbon, then water and carbon dioxide formed in combustion reactions. Propane, for example, undergoes combustion according to the following equation you can see over here. Propane is going to react with oxygen to form carbon dioxide and water. Now, the efficiency of a fuel refers to how much energy is released per unit amount, and we can measure it by using a calorimeter. A known mass of a fuel is combusted and used to heat up a known mass of water to calculate its heat or of combustion. Different fuels heat the water by different amounts and they can be analyzed and compared in this way. अब calorimeter experiment क्या है? Fill a copper can with 100 centimeter cube of water and record the initial temperature. नाउ स्टार्ट द स्पिरिट बर्नर और ये जो फ्यूल है जिसको आपने टेस्ट करना है द फ्यूल दैट यू वांट टू टेस्ट उसको अब आप बर्न करना शुरू कर दो and light the wick, heat the water, stir constantly for a set time until the fuel is completely burned and record the temperature of the water. अब आप एक final temperature भी record कर दो. Now measure the mass of the burner कि how much fuel was used in this spirit burner to change the temperature of this particular water. So step number one was using a measuring cylinder, place 100 centimeter cube of water into a copper can, measure and record the initial temperature of the water, then fill the spirit burner with a test substance and measure and record its mass. Then place the burner under the copper can, light a wick. Stir करें water को until the spirit burner burns out and then measure the highest temperature of the water. अब आप temperature change कैसे निकालोगे? Final temperature minus the initial temperature and you can find the number of moles burned as well. How? The change in mass divided by the molecular mass of whatever the hydrocarbon fuel you were using. और अमाउंट ऑफ एनर्जी अब हम कैसे निकालेंगे उसका एक फॉर्मूला होता है Q इज इक्वल टू एम सी डेल्टा टी. Q क्या है? Q स्टैंड्स फॉर द थर्मल एनर्जी या फिर हीट एनर्जी. ठीक है, थर्मल एनर्जी और द हीट एनर्जी वट एवर यू वांट टू कॉल इट. M स्टैंड्स फॉर द मास. एंड रिमेंबर इफ यू आर गिवन द वॉल्यूम आप उसको मास में कन्वर्ट कर सकते हो. 1 सेंटीमीटर क्यूब इज इक्वल टू 1 ग्राम. So you were given 100 centimeter cube of water, which means water would be 100 grams. C is the specific heat capacity of water. इसकी आपको वैल्यू याद करनी पड़ेगी. Memorize it. It is 4.18. And delta T is what? Final minus initial temperature. Hydrogen can also be used as a fuel, and hydrogen is used in rocket engines and in fuel cells to power some cars. It has a series of advantages and disadvantages regarding it using as a fuel as well. For example, इसके अगर हम advantages की बात करें, it releases more energy per kilogram than any other fuel except for nuclear fuels. It does not pollute as it only produces water on combustion and no other product is formed. But इसके disadvantages ये हैं that it is expensive to produce and it requires a lot of energy for the production process as well. It is also difficult and dangerous to store and move around because highly pressurized container होते हैं. Other than hydrogen as a fuel, you can also use some radioactive isotopes as fuel as well. जैसे कि यूरेनियम 235. यूरेनियम 235 जब decay करेगा, it can give off heat energy which is then used in nuclear power stations as well. And the heat that uranium 235 produces वो steam produce करेगा. उस heat से हम बनाएंगे steam and that steam is going to drive the turbines और turbines generator को चलाएंगी और generator electricity बनाएंगे. Nuclear fuel energy is clean as it does not produce any types of pollutants such as carbon dioxide or oxides of nitrogen or sulfur, but nuclear power plants are expensive to build and maintain as well as being potentially dangerous in the event of an accident as well अगर वो radioactive materials release हो गए थे. फ्यूल सेल्स की बात करें, हाइड्रोजन फ्यूल सेल क्या होता है? इट्स एन इलेक्ट्रोकेमिकल सेल which a fuel donates electrons at one electrode and oxygen gains at the other electrode. तो आपको दो equations याद रखनी है. एक equation you can memorize it. This is the oxidation equation that takes place at the anode. और फिर आपने एक कैथोड वाली इक्वेशन याद रखनी है विच इज द रिडक्शन इक्वेशन. ठीक है. सो दिस इज द एनोड ऑक्सीडेशन इक्वेशन एंड दिस इज द कैथोड रिडक्शन इक्वेशन. ये इलेक्ट्रोलिसिस की तरह होगा वेयर द इलेक्ट्रॉन्स विल बी ट्रांसफर्ड फ्रॉम द पॉजिटिव एनोड टू द नेगेटिव इलेक्ट्रॉन एनोड, और वो ट्रांसफर ऑफ इलेक्ट्रॉन्स इन इलेक्ट्रोकेमिकल सेल इज गोइंग टू प्रोड्यूस एनर्जी. So this is the overall reaction where the electrons move around the external circuit from the cathode to the anode. This movement of electrons is then used to drive an electric motor as well. So this is what a hydrogen fuel cell look like. So this hydrogen fuel cell has a lot of advantages. For example, they do not produce any pollution. They produce more energy per kilogram than either petrol or diesel. No power is lost on transmission as there are far fewer moving parts than combustion. लेकिन disadvantage ये है that this is highly expensive and you need highly pressurized tanks to store the oxygen and hydrogen gas as well. Moreover, fuel cells are affected by low temperatures becoming less efficient, and hydrogen is expensive to produce and store as well. And that is all for your chapter of chemical energetics.